everyone. Welcome to the Digital Media Academy speaker series for leading STEAM educators and school leaders. My name is Chris Bennett. I am so pleased to be hosting this series focused on the challenges facing K-12 school leaders in preparing young learners for the fields of tomorrow. Today's session is entitled Gamified Learning for K-12 Students, and I'm pleased to shortly introduce you to our guest, Joanna Lovejoy. But before I introduce Joanna, I'd like to introduce myself and share briefly about Digital Media Academy. My name is Chris Bennett. I am a longtime video game designer and an affiliate at Stanford Graduate School of Education. I'm also the engagement specialist at Digital Media Academy. Now, Digital Media Academy was founded in 1999 on the campus of Stanford University, and our flagship program, Leading STEAM Schools in the World, is a membership program that offers a complete, ready-to-use solution for K-12 schools that combines comprehensive STEAM curriculum, tailored consultation, and a supportive global community that empowers educators to meet the demands of 21st century learners. This speaker series is brought to you by the Digital Media Academy team and is available globally through the Leading STEAM Schools in the World community. So why are we here? This series aims to connect you with leading thinkers and change makers to unlock the tools and knowledge needed to lead K-12 education change. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We invite you to use the Q&A feature throughout the session, and we'll have time at the end of the session to take some questions from you. We'll also be sharing the recording of this session with you in the next few days. Without further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Joanna Lovejoy, our guest for today's session. Joanna is a project manager at Kinjo and was director of technology integration at Alpha. Joanna creates transformative learning experiences that sit at the intersection of gaming and learning and contributes to the broader discourse of K-12 education and preparing kids for a tech-enabled future. I would like to invite Joanna to join me on screen now. Hi, Joanna. Thank you so much for being with us. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your journey?
Absolutely. I started working in education in 2017. At the time, Alpha was under the name Emergent Academy. And really the goal was to take love of learning at the center of a school model and combine that with AI technology in order to maximize students' time in school. So in my course at Alpha, I got to be a guide, hands-on with students, creating workshops that combined different activities with passion projects, I suppose is the right way to say it. And each of the workshops had this test to pass. After my first year kind of working hands-on with students, I found that my real passion was looking more at ed tech and figuring out the right way to maximize the core skills time. So while there, really what I developed was a K-12 curriculum solely using adaptive technology with the support of really incredible staff to kind of motivate the students in real time. After that, I started working with Kinjo. I actually got to help collaborate on a workshop for Alpha with Kinjo, and they wanted to use these kind of meta experiences in Roblox games to teach life skills. So I got to work with the team to develop one of these workshops, and by the end of it, found that there is just so much opportunity in gaming to advance learning skills that I made the switch to Kinjo.
That's great. Let's dig right into this because you have such a great background with this. You spent a lot of time working with video games inside of classrooms. What have you seen that really works?
So I started working with video games in classrooms in Alpha. I actually led a workshop where we took the very, not video game, but very popular game WoW. And I used WoW as a framework to teach world building. After that workshop, I think I was kind of hooked on how to integrate video games into my workshops. What I found is that the best way to integrate video games is for are round based. So that way the game itself actually has a time limit. And I really focused on games that had alliance systems. We know that children in middle, high school, elementary school are really obsessed with their relationships. And so what I wanted to find were games that enabled them to have those relationships connected in the game so they could work together. The alliance systems, I think, really brought that additional excitement because you're getting to play with your friend in those moments. And I think that the last thing that I found that really helps is having an advocate for whichever game or experience you're going to incorporate. The advocate, I think, should always be a student, somebody who kind of has a personal relationship with the experience. When I was working at Alpha, I worked with a student who was obsessed with any of the E4 games. And for those of you that don't know, basically it's like a history simulation. It was really awesome getting to have him in class because we would be talking about, direct content for historical events, and he would get to share how his experience in the game would either mirror real historical events or how he could change the course of history. So I think having an advocate in the classroom is also very helpful.
Interesting. When you were talking about games with alliance systems and about how, especially kids, if you think about kids like in the middle school range, really, really thinking about relationships and how are the relationships in game perhaps mirroring what's happening inside school. What do you think about using games in the classroom that are collaborative versus using games that are competitive? Is there one that's kind of better than the other? Is it possible to have both? Any thoughts there?
You could definitely have both. I personally think that instead of collaborative games, we should be emphasizing cooperative games. It's kind of a technical, difficult collaboration versus cooperation. In collaborative games, there is a kind of a winner takes all mentality. So either as a team, you all win or you all lose. Whereas in a cooperative game, each individual player will have a different outcome. So winning for me could be different than winning for my teammate. Maybe I get more loot than my teammate, but maybe my teammate gets a sword that is particular to advancing their character in the game. When we look at cooperative gameplay, especially in the classroom, I think that what is beneficial is it mimics real life. My personal motivations are going to change day to day. And so sometimes when we're looking at cooperative gameplay, what we see is that you and I can have two different motivations, just like in real life, and we can come together to accomplish a particular goal. Because we hold these two individual motivations, typically our approach is going to be different, and you and I are able to learn from each other based off of what is motivating us to accomplish the task.
So I have another follow-up here because I think kind of the assumption about watching kids play games is that they're just existing in a fantasy world that has nothing to do with reality. But what I'm hearing from you is mimics real life. There's relationships in games that perhaps model or inform the relationships in real life. If you're a teacher or a school leader and you're thinking about using games, are you saying that we shouldn't be thinking of games kind of as a fantasy world, but that they're kind of modeling mechanisms that the kids are already having in the classroom? Am I hearing that right?
Sort of. What I would say is that the fact that a game is a fantasy world is actually the benefit of the fact that it's a game. By being in an immersive environment that isn't real life, I think children feel more comfortable in explorative play. And there is this excitement level that comes from being in a virtual world that isn't quote unquote real life. What I would also say is that because they're in this virtual environment doesn't mean that they aren't practicing real skills. These real skills are disguised in the game. And the benefit is that you both get to be kind of living in a fantasy world where you feel like you have endless opportunity to create, but you're also interacting with real people on the other side of this virtual space. So things like collaboration, cooperation, conflict, those interpersonal skills still exist in real life. And virtual spaces, I think, also allow for more creative problem solving because unlike real life, where maybe I can't simulate an explosion or I can't go do hand-to-hand combat, in a virtual space I can, and then I get to learn from these maybe not socially acceptable examples in real life.
Interesting. So let's jump to a slightly different topic. I know that school leaders and teachers can get really overwhelmed with all of the gamified learning options that are out there. Kind of figuring out whether they're really gamified and also figuring out is there actually learning involved. How are gamified learning apps different from games? The second part, are there any that you see that are both engaging to students and effective for learning?
Yes. So for those, I think that are kind of overwhelmed, I do have a recommendation to look at the EdTech Genome Project. This research takes out different ways to conceptualize selecting ed tech products in general, which I think also lends itself well to thinking about education or gamified education products. When I think about gamified learning in particular, I think the difference between gamified learning and a game is that the goal of gamified learning is content delivery, whereas the goal of a game is enjoyment or excitement or quote unquote fun. Because gamified learning's emphasis is on content delivery, I think sometimes they fail to recognize the very successful elements that make games addictive. The feedback loop, the fact that they're in like a perfectly enclosed system. There is no need to kind of exit the game in order to answer your problem. The systematic encoding, which is like what I'm about to fail and I get just in time information in the game. These are really successful and well-developed mechanics that I think add to that like addictive nature. Why can I go spend 30 hours playing a game? In gamified learning, what we see is that because content delivery is at the soul of the design, that they're not using these very developed systems. And so it breaks the illusion for the child. The reason that I like to quote unquote go play Roblox games is because it's a game and it's fun. Whereas in gamified learning, I know that I am being taught how to memorize like all the periodic elements, for example. I think that gamified learning that does it really well puts the game first and then figures out those natural game mechanic opportunities to encode or to teach the content. Right now, I am really playing Nano by Lighthouse. In this game, you are a scientist basically trying to stop a virus, and you are controlling a synthetic immune cell inside the body, and you are battling different like intrusive virus cells along the way, and you're trying to figure out like the origin of the virus that's making people sick. This at the heart is a game, right? I am battling enemies, I am collecting resources, I have fetch quests, but at the same time, I'm learning some very real things about collecting DNA and RNA to create, kind of a vaccine. They've used the mechanics of a quest to kind of teach the content, or they have used combat elements to kind of explain what happens when you get sick inside your body. These are natural mechanics that you see in really great games. And because of the narrative that they've put around it, and because of the way that they're telling the story, you're also getting the benefit of content delivery.
Interesting. When we think about games, and one thing that games do really well, whether it's students playing it or anyone playing a game, is that sense of agency of whether I, as a player, actually have choice over what's happening in the game experience. In the classroom, we don't always have the benefit of giving students agency, right? Especially if we have kind of a lesson plan. What are your thoughts around using games and using gamified learning in the classroom to kind of maximize the agency that students are feeling, to kind of get them more invested in the process?
Well, I think it was the Lego Foundation. They have their like characteristics of play. Agency is a big one of those. The benefit of agency, I think, in video games in general is that each player is kind of on their own quest, right? So agency already by design of you being the one playing it is kind of embedded in there. To enhance the learning environment, I think video games are a great tool, just because when an individual player is kind of tackling the problem at hand, their choices are going to like directly influence the gaming environment. Whereas in a classroom, I can give the illusion of agency. I still have control over all the outcomes, but unless you're the one that's developed the video game, that narrative actually can take many different approaches. And a good video game will have tons of different options, which I think also lends itself to agency, because then you're not only allowing the player to kind of choose the narrative inside the game, but then you can extract that experience to create pretty interesting conversations. You and I can both enter a virtual world and have two different experiences and then get to share that in the classroom.
Interesting. So it sounds like what you're saying is that a good game will present the player with the feeling of agency, even if they're somewhat or very constrained, but they can create the illusion. And you're also saying that there are ways to do that in using games and gamified learning in the classroom as well, where the students feel like they have something to say, that they have some choice, but you're not making it a complete open world where they can do whatever they want. Like you can do both.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is going to be the vehicle, or in this particular case, the game. Game type, I think, is probably the most important when deciding kind of the determination of agency. So you can have games that are designed with a linear path, aka, my player is pretty much funneled one storyline, or you can look at games that have branching paths. A branching path game gives, I think, from a classroom perspective, it's a really great way of teaching cause and effect, because then you have two different outcomes based off of player choice.
Interesting. Well, let's dig into a platform that I know is top of mind for a lot of teachers. It seems like every kid between the ages of 7 and 13 is playing Roblox. And I know in our work together at Kinjo, I know that you've really dug into which popular Roblox games can potentially be practicing certain skills. Can you tell me a little bit about how the Kinjo game evaluation rubric works?
Definitely. So right now our rubric is about 500 questions. The way that the rubric works is there are 2 points of evaluation. The first point is looking at mechanics. So game mechanics are the decisions basically that developers have chose that make the game enticing. My favorite example, and one that I use frequently, is permadeath, which is a game mechanic in roguelites. And essentially what it means is that when a player dies, all progress is lost with that death and they have to completely start over. So the first thing that we would do is we're looking at the game, we'll play through parts of it. We're trying to catalog all of those decisions that the developer made. So, okay, check, this game has permadeath. The second thing we do is we look at the life skills. So we have questions for that. And what we're looking for is the relationship between mechanic and life skill. Because the developer included permadeath in the game, we know that every time a player starts that game over, that there is a certain level of adaptability that is required of the player, because whatever I did the first time caused me to die, and I can't do that a second time. If you combine this with other mechanics like procedural generation, which means that the map of the game that I'm playing also changes upon death, then you can have things like adaptability, complex problem solving, working memory, because I have to basically recall every obstacle that I've went through in the past. I'm going to be seeing it presented to me in a different order. And I have to use metacognition to say, okay, what did I do wrong? And how do I apply it now to a new situation? All of these skills are happening in real time because the player has died, started the game over, is now moving through it. So in the rubric, what we're looking for are those mechanics that allow for life skill development. And we've created a relationship between mechanic and life skill, and that's really what we're mapping.
Interesting. Do you think that Roblox is more of a platform that students should be using at home, maybe with their parents, or is there any way of are there any Roblox games you can think of that would be workable in a classroom and then might even be useful from a pedagogical standpoint?
Absolutely. I got to use this game in a workshop in alpha. So I spent a lot of time with the game Adopt Me. Wildly popular. Brief explanation. Adopt Me is essentially a game where children are going to collect or quote unquote adopt pets. There is a very extensive catalog of rare pets, very reminiscent of early Pokemon days, where you are basically collecting the animal and then raising them up from infancy to adulthood. What is super interesting is that these pets have a rarity system around them. So I could have a dog that maybe is super common, and then I can have a dragon that is legendary. This is so hard to come by. Because of the rarity system, there's an internal economy around children trading these. And this is also amplified because if I have 4 of a particular pet, I can also level those up into something called a neon pet, which is like beyond legend. What we did was we basically played the game, collected our own pets, and decided that because the internal economy was so strong, this was a really easy way of teaching kids about the stock market and about having a diversified portfolio. So The activity that we created was basically saying, okay, you have to have a minimum portfolio requirement. So you have to have X number of currency in your pets. And then we're going to allow you to decide how you want to expand your portfolio. We had some kids who were strictly focused on getting neons. We had some kids who were like, okay, I want to try to find as many of these legendary pets as possible. And so what we saw was the different trading and bartering going on, the way that they were watching the value of these pets change inside the game, strategizing on different ways to kind of level up pets to trade them faster. This is a really easy, I think, game to throw into a classroom because the internal economy of the game is so strong on its own. And the mechanism that the child is really doing is quote unquote collection, which has a very positive reward loop inside the game.
Interesting. So would you consider using a game like Adopt Me in a classroom? Would you consider that collaborative or competitive or cooperative? Just kind of going back to that conversation that we had a few minutes ago.
I think it really depends on how you structure the learning activity. We had kids broken up into teams. So there was a competition between the teams, and then there was a collaborative effort among the group. So each person, well, I guess it was cooperative. Each person had their own motivations on how they wanted to create their stock portfolio. But collaboratively, they were all working towards a goal, which was to have the most revenue. And then that was compared against other teams. This became super interesting because what we found is that even though each child had their own motivations as to what the portfolio was going to look like, they were aware of their team's portfolio desires and actually would help each other collect specific pets or grow them to level them up to neons in order to strengthen not only their teammates' portfolio in this kind of exchange, but also with the overall goal of being able to win the competition.
Interesting. So it sounds like you're saying that when using games in the classroom, and in this case, the Roblox game, Adopt Me, you can get both competitive and collaborative by the fact that you're competing with everyone in the classroom, but it may be one team versus another team versus another team, and there's cooperation and collaboration happening inside of those teams.
Absolutely. I think another really great, maybe simpler example of this relationship is the game Bed Wars. Bed Wars has very short rounds. Each team, I think, has 5 players. And essentially, it's a version of Capture the Flag in this virtual environment. I think a really easy way of bringing Bed Wars into a classroom is simulating, like if I was talking about the Civil War, using it as a simulation for battle.
So by this one, you're referring to the American Civil War?
The American Civil War, yes.
Okay.
Or really any war that has battle. So if I was teaching any history course, you could use the same example as the example for this one. There were a couple times where the product line, like the delivery system for getting reinforcements in troops was delayed. In this example, you basically have 2 teams of 5 who are about to play in Bed Wars. And what you can do is put a time delay on when specific players can join their team. And now you're simulating the same kind of effect that would happen or did happen, I guess, in the American Civil War, which is my troops were delayed getting to me. So I'm working at quote unquote half team capacity, and you're able to kind of mirror that inside a game.
Interesting. So I know the folks that are watching, they love to hear about kind of the background and kind of the latest and greatest from a science standpoint. But let's get really practical right now. From a purely practical standpoint, what can a STEAM school do to really incorporate games and gamified learning into their curriculum? Not just a way that's going to engage students, but to create deeper learning.
At a really practical level, I think the first thing is to evaluate curriculum. There's kind of this idea that technology should replace everything in a curriculum, or that it's going to be this one-stop solution. And I feel like when technology is used at its best is when you find natural intersection points to kind of incorporate it. If I was going to lean on the nano example earlier, this one is really looking at biology on an intimate level. And more specifically, it's really to like the how viruses are working inside the body. That is a natural place to jump in and say, okay, I want a visual representation for how this process happens. What technology exists that I can then use to incorporate and kind of fully explain this? You don't have to have a game solution for every part of your curriculum, but when there are natural intersection points where a visual aid or personal experience would amplify the learning, that's when I would go and look for these technology solutions. And I would also look for technology solutions that are kind of one-off, not to pick on different edtech products, but there are a lot of edtech products that try to cover every core subject out there known to man. And what I would say is if you are a math teacher and you want a really great way of tackling fractions, go to the App Store and look for like Robo Math Fractions. It is a very small app, and the entire goal is to teach fractions, and they do it exceptionally well. You don't have to find these huge products basically to replace your entire lesson plan. There are very small, well-designed applications out there that teach one skill. And I think if you look at it from a skill level, you're going to be a lot more successful in integrating technology into the classroom.
Thanks for those great ideas. When I dig into the research literature that's out there, I'm always amazed by how many times Minecraft comes up. It's almost like the default to the conversation of using games for learning. And we've seen not only with the base game of Minecraft, but also Minecraft Education Edition. We've seen a collaboration they did with the BBC of Frozen Planet 2, where they're actually incorporating things from the television show into the game. Why is Minecraft so successful? And why do you think it's made that transition into the classroom so well? And are you kind of a believer of it?
Definitely a believer of it. I think Minecraft is easy to integrate because at its base, it's really it's just a virtual environment for creativity, more or less. So I think that the reason that Minecraft is so malleable is because inside the space, when you're kind of constructing something, the construction piece of it can be applied to a lot of different disciplines. If I wanted, there was an article that was resurfacing from a few years ago, but a gentleman recreated the entire known universe in Minecraft. And what's really amazing about the fact that he was able to do this is that there is a coded piece where it's like, let's think about all of the objects that exist in the known universe. Let me create a version of it and then templatize that to kind of create this expansive space. The creativity is that you're actually playing designer and you are more or less God creating the universe on an individual level. I'm creating the sun. What does this star look like? But then you have the educational component, which is that I have to go and research all of the known components of the universe. There are stars and galaxies and meteors, and I have to really understand how space works because these objects are going to be floating in it. The fact that it is kind of an open environment for creativity is the reason it's so successful.
Thank you. And for all of our speakers, we always like to ask this final question, kind of putting your futurist hat on. Where do you see the future of education going?
I see a transition. Instead of it being a knowledge base, I see this transition where we are going to be looking at education from a skills first perspective. And what I am hoping is that if we are leading skills first, that there is going to be more opportunity for blended learning. I think right now in classrooms pretty much worldwide, we think about disciplines and they're very singular. I teach math and I think about math, and it exists kind of in this individual bubble. If I think about the skills that math is wanting me to master, I can think about complex problem solving and reasoning and logic. And those topics lend themselves to other disciplines. So I think if we imagine the future of education in a skills first perspective, we could say, okay, I want to teach logic as the starting skill, and then what disciplines lend themselves to logic. And now you have a more robust, I think, learning experience because you're able to pull in knowledge from different areas. Your examples become richer. And at the heart of it, what we know is that we can't predict what the future is going to hold from a job perspective. But if we are equipping children with life skills, we are equipping them for any imaginable future.
I love your take on a skills first perspective and making room for more blended learning, which I think a lot of us would like to see. What part do you think that games or gamified learning can have in that better future?
I think by design actually are blended learning. If I think about D-Day, for example, which is a Roblox game, D-Day is really looking at a historical event from an American lens. And what is super interesting about this Roblox experience is that you are learning military tactics, right? So a way of thinking about kind of spatially, where should I be landing? What is the optimal route to take in order to complete the task? The other thing that's really interesting is that they have incorporated real sounds from World War II. So the real audio recordings are there. They've taken what I think is like a pretty lovely attention to historical detail by making like specific uniforms and the weaponry indicative of what was actually happening in World War II. This game, right, which is the objective is basically, for the Allies to go and storm the beaches and gain the territory, also is teaching you historical significance. It's teaching you cause and effect. It's teaching you about different military roles and positions. There's things like paratroopers in there, which unless you're a history buff or a military history buff, you may not know what that is. Many other games do this exceedingly well, even games that are roped in fantasy. I think when we are looking at games like WoW, there's a pretty popular discourse around gender identity and around race. And these are embedded in the narrative when we look at the different archetypes that are present in there. So games, I think, are natural environments for blended learning. And at the heart of them, they are also there for skill development, because the entire point, typically playing a game, is for the player to level up figuratively and actually in the game. They're developing more complex skills, which means that the game will progressively get harder for them.
Nice. We have some great questions that are coming in. Love to ask you a couple of them in our remaining time. We have one from Frederick who says, I'm an English teacher, 7 to 12, and are interested in incorporating gaming in my teaching. I can imagine using games to reinforce ideas coming from literature and language learning, and also exploring the game itself as a story genre. Do you have any recommendations that might be specific to my field?
Well, I think D&D is a really great starting point. D&D is Dungeons and Dragons. I think popularized in the 80s, more or less, you have a group of players who each have a different role to serve in the game. And then they're also typically a mythical character of some sort. So you'll have somebody who kind of leads the charge in combat. You have somebody who heals. You may have a character who is more stealthy, or somebody who's very loquacious and is doing like the negotiation for the team. But essentially you have a band of misfits who come together with these different skills. And the goal is to kind of conquer the quest at hand. So I have to go find X treasure. And along the way, I'm going to be overcoming different obstacles with my team. The reason I think that, especially from a English emphasis for subject matter, this is such a great is because they have a lot of pre-baked campaigns. And so you have endless opportunity for looking at different narrative structures and storylines. And the thing is that because these campaigns already exist, you are never going to run out of something new and refreshing to look at. You can buy pre-baked campaigns pretty much online is like a really easy spot. And then there's a really wonderful YouTube podcast that has a bunch of friends who've played D&D for years, and you can actually watch them play through different campaigns. I think that is also a really easy way of doing some literary analysis, because you get to see how they are responding, and then you can challenge your class basically with the same prompt to see how they would respond.
Interesting. We have another question here that's, I think a lot of it is around time and about how teachers don't have a lot of time in the classroom. This question says, how do you get around all the opening game mechanics that require students to create characters, meet in the world, establish shared goals? In our experience, maybe just logging in for the first time. So from the questioner's experience, it takes time to develop your character and relationships in the game in order to take on challenges together and explore large worlds.
Man, time is always going to be a tricky one here. Back to kind of a point I made earlier, I think finding the right game is always really helpful. Games that are round-based typically won't have a lot of character development in the beginning part of it, or it's very minimized because the rounds are quick. You're basically jumping in and out. The other thing about round-based games is that typically you'll create a character that is then used in a lot of different virtual environments, which I think is also something that I really like about Roblox games is that your Roblox avatar is created and then you get to enter different experiences as your Roblox avatar. It doesn't mean that this is the case every time. There's a game, Booga Booga, where you're actually creating your character and then jumping into the game, not as your avatar. I would say making this an at-home exercise is always really nice. Giving a time constraint and basically putting some pressure around character development is another way to get through it quickly. In general, I recommend a lot of YouTube videos. The fact is that, like, especially for Roblox experiences, these are covered ad nauseum by YouTubers. And so it is a really easy way for you to vet games that may have a long introduction period versus games that you can kind of jump right into. They'll do the research for you, and your job really is just to listen to YouTube banter.
You've mentioned avatars a number of times. For teachers and school leaders who may not be kind of steeped in the significance of avatars for K-12 students, can you talk about why the concept of avatars is so important for students, especially of a certain age range?
Avatars, why are they so important? I think avatars are so important because it is the manifestation of them in a virtual world. And because this world isn't our world, they actually can become any character that they have a desire to be. If I am shy in real life, I can be bold and outgoing in a virtual environment. And to add to that, I have endless opportunity to change who I want to be. And unlike real life, where if I'm sitting next to somebody, they kind of reinforce those personality stereotypes. In the game, so it's not as easy to have this like reinforced narrative because you may not know the person you're playing with on such an intimate level where they can be like, oh, you've always been this way, Joanna. So I think there's just endless opportunity for exploration. They can really become any identity that is appealing to them and test it out. So.
Thank you. We have time for one more super quick question. There seems to be a movement in esports in schools. How do gamified learning and esports come together? How do we expand the esports narrative to include more holistic gamified learning in schools?
I love this inclusion of esports. There are so many great benefits of esports. I would say, for those of you who don't know, esports is essentially like a group of players playing a sports game. It could be Madden, it could be something else. I think really the reason that it's so interesting to have it incorporated and really easy ways to incorporate it is the fact that just like real sports, you are solely relying on that collaborative element and communication. Ways that this can be incorporated is if I'm just teaching basic communication skills, jumping into an esports environment where I have to figure out how to score with the person next to me, you get to do that in real time. And so the benefit from an educator is that unlike when they're playing at home, you actually get to watch the communication happening in real time. You can call out students who are doing a great job of acknowledging when somebody does well or giving real time feedback like, hey, press this button to do Y. That is a really easy way of promoting the communication skills inside a classroom. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Esports are something that we've seen on, kind of professionally on college campuses, making their way to high school campuses. And I really like how you made the connection between the esports that kids are so engaged with and the kind of effective learning that we're really been talking about here. Joanna, we've come to the end of our available time today already. I can't believe it. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us. I also want to, again, thank Digital Media Academy for sponsoring this series. You can find out more about the leading STEAM schools in the world membership program on our website at digitalmediaacademy.org/schools, or you can contact us anytime at info@digitalmediaacademy.org. And on behalf of Digital Media Academy, I want to thank everyone who's able to join us today for this session. Such a great Q&A. Really love the banter we were getting from the participants, and we wish you a fantastic rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.